This is my 2000 Dodge Viper GTS, and I've been working on, tuning, and casually racing this Viper for about a year and a half, which has not only made me realize how special this car is, but I've discovered some seriously bizarre stuff about these Vipers along the way. Now, you probably already know a few things about this iconic American supercar, like that it has an 8-liter V10 that produces 450 horsepower, and that it can go from 0 to 60 in a little over 4 seconds.
Wow, you can read the brochure.
But in this video, I'm going to reveal some truly strange and impressive things about these early Vipers, some of which only a handful of people in the world know about. I've come about this rare information from not only working on my Viper and reading actual physical books about it, but mainly by having a couple chats with the legendary Roy Schoberg, who was the chief engineer on the original Viper team. And while I didn't intend to make a video like this, after talking to Roy, I just had to share some of his amazing stories. Roy oversaw all aspects of the Viper's development, from the engine, chassis, and drivetrain to sourcing a headlight supplier, which actually has a pretty wild story behind it. Now, there may not seem to be anything special about these headlights at first glance, but do you see that protruding bulb filled with yellow liquid inside the headlight? What do you think that is? If you guess that it's a blinker filled with fluid, you'd actually be right. These Vipers are the only vehicles I know of that actually use a fluid in their blinkers.
Got him!
So it's actually a bubble level, the same thing any self-respecting man would use to properly hang a portrait of his dog. But this was something I'd never seen in a headlight before, and I imagine you haven't either. So I had to ask Roy about it, and his response was so good, I'll just let him tell you the story.
That was thanks to BMW. Those headlights came from BMW. Their Z1, which never made it to the United States, those were their headlights. And they had conned GE into building those headlights at GE's cost, not at BMW's cost. So when they didn't like it and walked away from the program, GE stuck with this tooling and headlight design with the bubble. And the bubble's used in the plant to align the headlights. So I got the whole headlight system free, normally $2.5 million, plus $1 million to development. So I got a developed design that we were able to fit onto the Viper design from Gen 1 and Gen 2, and it came with the bubble. So I said, well, the bubble's silly, we'll remove it. Manufacturing wanted $1.50 each headlight to remove the bubble. And I said, screw that, leave the bubble on.
So what Roy's essentially saying here is that the Viper's headlights were actually designed and developed by GE for a completely different car, the BMW Z1, an interesting German creation that never made it to America. But BMW rejected that headlight design and ended up going with the boxier style you see here. And unbeknownst to BMW, their discarded headlights eventually found a new home at Chrysler. This saved Chrysler millions of dollars on the Viper program, but it also meant that the Viper engineers had to design the front bumper and hood around these headlights, and I think they did a pretty good job of it. Next, we move inside the cabin. Do you notice anything missing from the center console? Shifter, parking brake, ashtray, but no cup holder? There's few things I enjoy more than taking a spirited drive to Virginia City while savoring an ice-cold Red Bull, but having to hold the can in my hand the whole time is definitely a pain. And I know I sound like a Nancy for complaining about this, but Chrysler effectively invented the cup holder when they introduced the minivan in 1983. So I had to ask Roy about this, and once again his answer was pure gold.
Because Iacocca hated Road and Track, because they were the ones that gave Chrysler the world-renowned cup holder award. Not for anything else, not for engines, not for chassis, not for, styling, just for the cup holder. Iacocca wasn't real happy about that. He wanted more significant awards than for a good cup holder. And that's why the first Viper didn't have a cup holder.
Now, before I can show you the next quirky thing about these Vipers, I need to set the tone by taking you on a quick trip down memory lane. 1980s America. Big hair, the moonwalk, Nintendo, Ronald Reagan,
government is the problem,
and roads from California to Pennsylvania filled with boring, boxy, and gutless vehicles. This uninspiring landscape was mainly the result of the oil crises of the 1970s when the price of gas tripled and regulatory pressure from the EPA that mandated average passenger vehicle efficiency of 27.5 miles per gallon. This forced American car manufacturers to move away from inefficient V8s and build cheaper cars with smaller engines that got better gas mileage. So Chrysler, building a gas-guzzling V10 supercar in the late 80s, was borderline an act of defiance. So the Viper team had to use a few tricks to win over the EPA. one of which has to do with this little arrow that occasionally lights up on the cluster. Its job is to let you know that a solenoid has been activated in the transmission that will guide your attempted second gear shift to fourth gear instead. This keeps the engine speed down, thus improving gas mileage, but it actually drops the RPM so much that you can feel the engine bogging. Another trick the Viper team used to improve gas mileage was ridiculously long gearing. On my Viper, second gear tops out around 82 miles per hour, and in sixth gear, it could theoretically approach 300 miles per hour if it didn't have to deal with any wind resistance. This super long gearing, combined with the skip shift feature, was enough to get the EPA stamp of approval, but they did slap on a $2,600 gas guzzler tax, which was a pretty decent chunk of change back in 1992. So there's a common myth that these early Vipers don't handle well. We've all seen the videos of Vipers crashing, and I regularly receive comments from the Euro boys telling me what a poor piece of American engineering my Viper is. But this is totally false. The original RT10 Viper actually has a perfectly balanced weight distribution of 50-50, which is quite a feat of engineering considering the Viper's engine weighed over 600 pounds at the time. And as you can see, the Viper's massive V10 actually sits completely behind the front axles, something I wish Audi would take note of. Roy told me that we can thank Carroll Shelby for this, as he repeatedly insisted on weight reduction and having a balanced chassis, along with Francois Costang's engineering ability to actually pull it off. Emerson Fittipaldi, the two-time Formula One champion, once said that driving the Viper is as close as you can get to driving a race car on the street. The coupe version, known as the Viper GTS, hit the streets in 1996. This variant came with exterior door handles, actual windows, and a revised V10 that made about 10% more power. The GTS actually weighs slightly less than its predecessor, and its weight distribution was further improved to a 46-54 split, which is an excellent setup for sticking launches and navigating corners at high speed. And in May of 1997, Motor Trend put the Viper GTS up against a menagerie of high-performance cars, including a Porsche 911 Turbo, a Ferrari F355 Berlinetta, and an Acura NSX. Not only did the Viper GTS beat everything in terms of acceleration, it had the highest top speed, it tied the Ferrari for first place on the skid pad at 1.01 lateral Gs, and it absolutely smoked everything in the slalom test. The writer of the article puts it best. The Viper GTS ripped through the slalom cones at an electrifying 73.6 mph average. That's the fastest ever Motor Trend slalom run by any automobile, surpassing a horde of modified cars, many of which were fitted with super sticky race rubber. The Viper's achievement was even more remarkable considering its massive width, which typically works against a fast slalom time. The ultimate test was done on a 7-turn, 3/4 mile circuit where once again the Dodge Viper GTS came out on top with the fastest lap time. So why are these cars known to be so dangerous then? Well, when you put a driver who's used to driving 4 bangers or their mom's SUV behind the wheel of a manual-only supercar that doesn't have traction control, ABS, and makes almost 500 pound-foot of torque at 2,000 RPM, there's a good chance that driver's going to get bit. These early Vipers will give you what you ask of them. Unlike modern cars and many cars of the time, they won't limit your throttle request or try to intervene if you're about to lose control. They won't even beep at you for not putting your seatbelt on. A Viper engine-sized thank you to Roy Schoberg for taking the time to chat with me about his experience leading the Viper program. He wanted me to mention that his comments are based on an aging memory and that he has nothing but love for what the Viper team achieved. I also got to give a big shout out to Cool Classics International for allowing me to get footage of their pristine 1992 Dodge Viper. This all-original RT10 only has 36 miles and was the 100th Viper ever built, which made seeing it in person pretty special. Cool Classics has a trove of exotic and rare vehicles for sale, and I highly recommend checking out their facility if you're ever in the Reno-Tahoe area.